So far, in my top 5 favorite series, I've covered Godzilla, Ghidorah, Mothra, and Mechagodzilla. Unfortunately, from this point out, I don't think there even are 5 different versions of other kaiju to choose from. I know someone will correct me, but maybe Rodan is the only one who actually has 5 different versions to choose from? But then I don't really care about Rodan either way, so there you go. Otherwise, there's something like, I think, 3 different versions of Gigan, 2 versions of Hedorah, and basically 1 of anybody else. So in that spirit, I'm going to lump them all together into my top 5 favorite Toho Showa era kaiju altogether. One thing you might pick up as we go through this list is that I like weird monsters. Despite liking dinosaurs in real life, I'm not as big on the dinosauriform kaiju. Like 1 or 2 is fine, but after that, it gets a bit tired, right? Like it's a big T-Rex, it's a big Ankylosaurus, it's a big Pteranodon, it's a big, that whatever. I like more original and more strange kaiju that sort of take their cues and inspirations from other sources. And that's a perfect place to begin with number 5, Hedorah. As a kid, I grew up with Showa Godzilla films, and even owned a VHS tape of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. But as an adult, I became a bit of a film snob. For me, for a while, it was all about the original Gojira, because it was such a profound masterpiece of Japanese cinema, as a meditation on the horrors of the atomic bomb, and it was in black and white. But for various reasons, I started getting more into 1950s and 60s film, mainly because of Disney and Jules Verne adaptations. So I decided to give the other 50s and 60s Toho films a chance, and found them quite charming. Not really comparable to Gojira, but still enjoyable in their own right. And I was still reluctant to go further into the 70s, though, mainly because I don't like the 70s in general. I mean, I was born during them. It was a dour, depressing, and ugly decade. The fashion was truly terrible, the color palette was atrocious, you had disco, the oil crisis, economic depression, and even Jimmy Carter had to do a whole public speech telling America to chin up. 2001: A Space Odyssey ruined science fiction films until Star Wars came out, and Night of the Living Dead ruined horror. Why would I want to watch 70s Godzilla movies, which are widely regarded as the nadir of Godzilla anyway? But I did eventually get the Criterion Blu-ray set for $50 from a local seller on Facebook and actually watched them. And for the most part, the warnings were correct. They are generally pretty awful movies. But one stands out for its psychedelic madness and amazing kaiju design: Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Without getting too much into a movie review, Godzilla vs. Hedorah is a welcome refresh to how a Godzilla movie is done. I appreciate the baton passing from atomic anxiety to environmentalism, but more than that, I appreciate the weird psychedelic style of it, the feverish song and dance numbers, the animated interludes, and the general freshness of it compared to the formula that had grown stale by Destroy All Monsters. I mean, even All Monsters Attack at least had that much going for it, despite all of its other egregious flaws. Then there's the monster. Hedorah is, much like his movie, one of the most original kaiju. Toho radically departed from the dinosauriform kaiju to give us an oozing pustule of a kaiju, a slithering, slimy, unnatural monster whose very presence is corrosive to life and infrastructure. Hedorah is humankind's corruption and destruction of the environment given physical shape, which eventually turns on us, symbolizing our innate connection to the environment. We need a healthy environment for our own sakes, let alone any intrinsic value to the environment for its own sake. He's one of the most aesthetically and conceptually interesting kaiju, not just of the Showa era, but of the entire genre. And as evidenced by this list, he has grown to become one of my favorites. Number 4, Mechanicon. I don't know that I have much more to say about this that I didn't already say in my video about Japanese King Kong. Mechanicon, the original robotic kaiju doppelganger, is a great design. Unlike the robustly industrial look of Mechagodzilla, Mechanicon still comes from the sleek mid-century era of streamlined atomic style. He's better looking than any of Toho's attempts at King Kong himself. Toho's Kongs are a bit, strange, but Mechanicon is spot on. He's a great design, and kinda cute, which typically helps. Number 3, Dogura. Other than the next two on my list, I think Dogura is one of the best concepts for a kaiju ever developed. It eschews the dinosaur form to give us a kaiju based on a jellyfish design. And not just a jellyfish, but a jellyfish from space, thus turning the kaiju into a Lovecraftian scale cosmic horror. The effects for portraying Dogura are excellent, superimposing a model in a tank of water onto the screen, floating ethereal in the atmosphere, its mysterious tentacles reaching down beneath a cover of clouds. But even more than all of that is the type of threat the monster presents. Dogura consumes carbon, beginning with its most concentrated form in diamonds. Eventually, as the diamonds start to run out, it switches to the next most concentrated form in coal. Logically, this presents a global threat to all life on Earth. Once it runs out of coal, then presumably it would switch to the next most concentrated form of carbon, which is life. Virtually all life on Earth is based on carbon molecules. This tentacled cosmic horror is threatening to sterilize Earth of every living thing. From every human, to every tree, to every microorganism, to every molecule of the only element that makes the evolution of life possible. One could imagine how the universe was once full of life, but the reason so many planets are sterile and lifeless now is because of Dogura's slow drift through the cosmos. Too bad the movie was all about a gang of jewel thieves. Man, what a weird film. Number 2, Gojira. Yeah, I know, he's the classic! But Godzilla is actually only my second favorite kaiju. I mean, even then, for the sheer aesthetics of it, the original Gojira might only be this high out of sentimentality. I mean, being carried more by the weight of his movie than his actual design. Had Dogura been a better movie that capitalized better on what the monster is, that might have come up higher. But then, Godzilla is Godzilla. It's hard to beat Godzilla. Plus, I can already sense the torches and pitchforks for putting Godzilla a mere second. So who came in at number 1 then? Number 1, Mothra. I did a whole video on my favorite versions of Mothra and why I like Mothra in general anyway, so go take a boo at that for a more thorough discussion. Suffice it to say that I'm charmed by what Mothra represents as a goddess of life, death, and rebirth, weirdly conceived as a giant moth of all things. It's such an out-of-left-field way to represent such an interesting concept in the canon of Toho Kaiju. I'm also a little amused at how this list began with a kaiju representing pollution and environmental destruction personified, and ends with a goddess of nature personified. Nice symmetry there, if I do say so myself. So, where does that leave us with this? Well, there's still non-Toho Kaiju I could do, and Toho Kaiju from other eras. I mean, I haven't done Heisei or Millennium yet. But that otherwise kind of concludes this part of the series. But there are still more monsters out there that aren't from Japan. So I think I can keep this series going a little while longer.